Hello listeners, welcome back to Luke's English Podcast. This is episode number 880, and in this one I'm going to read an article to you, a news article which I've found. It's all about the Olympic Games in Paris. I'll read the article to you, we're going to discuss some of the ideas that it talks about, and then I will explain loads of vocabulary to you, okay? So, the Olympics is coming to Paris in less than 100 days, and at the moment the city is trying to get itself ready for this, and there are various arguments going on about whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. What will the games reveal about French society or life in Paris? There's a lot of interesting things to discuss here, and so that's what we're going to be doing this time. What will the Olympics be like here? Will they be a triumph or a total catastrophe? What are the residents of Paris really afraid of? That's what we're going to talk about, and that's what we're going to find out about, and you're going to learn loads of vocabulary in the process. Before I get started, I just wanted to say, premium listeners, did you notice that I published Premium Series 59, parts 1 to 3? All three parts are available for premium subscribers right now. Hopefully you've added LEP Premium to a podcast app on your phone, and you've got those episodes in your episode list. If you haven't done that, just sign in to your Acast account, teacherluke.co.uk/account, and then just sign into your account, and that's how you can add the show to a podcast app on your phone. P59, parts 1 to 3. It's a big vocabulary review of words and phrases which came up in the episode about the MBTI personality test. So loads of useful vocab for talking about personality traits, behaviour, ways of thinking. Okay, now you heard me use the vocab naturally in the episode, but in this premium series, I'm going through it all again, talking about the vocab, highlighting certain things, teaching you and reminding you of all those useful words and phrases, going through it again, because repetition is so important, reviewing language is so important. It's all part of a process that I use, a teaching method that I use to help you to expand your vocabulary. So that's available for premium subscribers. P59, parts 1 to 3. Check it out right now. What else? Thank you if you attended my online Zoom talk about learning vocabulary recently. There were lots of people in the Zoom talk, and it was really nice to kind of have a bit more of a connection to my listeners than I normally would when recording a podcast, and people said very nice things, and it was just very lovely, and I did my talk, and so thanks for joining. I hope you enjoyed it. And if you did sign up, but you couldn't attend, then you should have received an email from Claire with the link to the video of my presentation. So if you signed up, you should be able to see the video. Maybe, hopefully, I'll be able to publish that video recording of my presentation. Hopefully, I'll be able to publish it on my YouTube channel or my podcast at some point. If I can't do that, I might kind of re-record it and make an episode about it anyway, because I think it was full of really useful and important points about how to learn vocabulary properly and the various ways in which you can really make sure that you understand, remember, recall, and use new vocabulary, which is so important for achieving a good level of English. So there you go. Those are my announcements. Let's get started then with this episode. And there are notes that you'll find on the website page for this episode. Okay, and I'm going to read from those notes right now, including the link to the article. So episode 880, is Paris ready for the Olympic Games 2024? Article plus vocabulary. So here's the sort of intro to this. I'm in Paris, and it's less than 100 days until the Olympic Games begin here, and the city is still getting ready. I mean, it's still not ready. They still don't entirely know exactly how they're going to do the opening ceremony, where it's going to be, what it's going to be like. It sounds so stressful. It sounds like the organisers are really sort of doing it all a bit last minute. They've had years to prepare. But I mean, to be fair, there are lots of factors involved which might affect the way that they can do the opening ceremony. We're going to be talking about this. So is the city ready? Well, not really yet, but we'll see. Let's read an article on the subject. So I found this article on theweek.com. I don't know if you're familiar with this website, The Week. It's a newspaper. It used to be a magazine that I used to subscribe to when I lived in England. And every Friday I'd get a new copy of The Week. And it's just it was a really great magazine. I think it still is published as a sort of little newspaper magazine. I learnt about this from the private secretary to the Prime Minister of Norway, bizarrely enough. So is it the Prime Minister of Norway? Prime Minister of Norway. Yeah, okay. Right, so not the President of Norway, but the Prime Minister, of course, because they've got a royal family, haven't they? Anyway, I learnt about this from the private secretary to the Prime Minister of Norway. So when I used to teach English in London, one week we got this very high profile, very important client, a student who came to improve her English for a week or two, and she was given to me. I was given the task of teaching her, and it turned out she was the private secretary to the Prime Minister of Norway. I keep saying that, but what does that actually mean? That's basically the sort of extremely high level person in the government, a very high level civil servant, someone who works right next to the Prime Minister. So she was in this incredibly high level position, working directly with the Prime Minister of Norway. And so it was really interesting for me to spend a week with her, helping her with her English, and also just learning so much from her. Very, very intelligent, very worldly person. And she recommended that I subscribe to The Week because she was reading it. And the good thing about The Week is that it's basically a sort of a summary of what all the other newspapers are saying about the top stories of the moment. So instead of having to read all the papers, you just read The Week because it summarises what all those other papers are saying very neatly and concisely. And it's available, on the internet now, theweek.com. Also, they've got a really good email newsletter, which basically sort of collects their top stories of the moment and just puts them straight in your inbox. This episode is not sponsored by The Week. I'm just saying it's genuinely, I find it a good thing to read. So I found this article on theweek.com. There's the US version and the UK version. So I'm going to read the article to you, then explain and discuss what is written. I'll also go through vocabulary from the article, and there is plenty. So it's going to be like this. Topic, we'll do reading and listening, then we'll move on to vocabulary and discussion. Maybe I'll do the discussion before the vocab or all of it at the same time. So before we read the article, here are some questions to get you thinking. If you like, you can stop the podcast and discuss these questions for some speaking practice. So question 1, what are the benefits and costs for a city hosting the Olympic Games? Why would a city want to host the Olympic Games? What are the good things you get? What are the benefits? But also, what are the downsides? Okay, second question, has the Olympics ever been held in your country or city? Have you ever had the Olympics where you live? And how did people feel before, during, and after the Games? What was the mood before it? What happened during the Games? What was the legacy after the Games? Were people positive about it? Did it have a positive effect on the city? Did it have a positive legacy? And thirdly, 100 days before the Olympics are due to happen, what do you think people are worrying about? What is it that Parisians are worried about or even scared about? So I've got some comprehension questions, but we're going to skip through those and get straight to the article here. Okay, so here we go. So theweek.com, I'm using the British version. Olympics 2024, is Paris ready to party? The sort of subheading is this. And by the way, so I'm going to read through the article just from start to finish, and then I'll go through and deal with vocabulary and probably discuss things as we go. So if there are bits that you don't understand, if there are phrases, words and things that you don't understand, or you generally don't really understand exactly what's being said in the article, don't worry, because I'm going to go through it bit by bit and explain every single thing for you. So, build up to this summer's games marred by rows over national identity, security and pollution. So, the lighting of the Olympic torch today comes amid a dampening of enthusiasm for the Paris Games in an increasingly fractious France, commentators warn. We're ready for this final straight, said Paris Olympics chief organiser Tony Estanguet at a press conference to mark the 100-day countdown. But the French capital's often hard-to-please residents appear in no mood for a party yet, said France 24. Security threats and fecal pollution is a kind of subheading. With the clock ticking down until the games kick off on the 26th of July, France's bitter politics and gloomy mindset are dampening the mood among a fractious public, said the Japan Times. The build-up has been marred by rows that go to the heart of a bitter national debate about identity and race. Hervé Lebras, a sociologist, told the paper that the games threaten to underline the major fractures in France, notably the fracture between Paris and the rest of the country. An Odexa poll of more than 1,200 Paris region residents last November found that 44% thought the games were a bad thing and that 52% were planning to leave the city during the 16-day event. One Parisian told the BBC that staying would be unbearable, with the games making it impossible to park, impossible to move around, impossible to do anything. Security fears are also growing amid mounting global tensions. In a break from the tradition of opening the games in the main stadium, the organisers have devised a grandiose ceremony centred around a parade of barges on the River Seine, said Le Monde. The original plan was for as many as 600,000 spectators to watch from the riverbanks, but security and logistical concerns have led the government to progressively scale back the plan, with the spectator numbers reduced to 300,000. And President Emmanuel Macron said yesterday that the ceremony might be moved to a new location if the authorities decide that the risk of an attack, potentially by drones, is too great. There are Plan Bs and Plan Cs, he said, including holding the opening at the city's Stade de France, he told television interviewers. Asked if the Kremlin would seek to disrupt the Olympics, Macron said that he had no doubt. Another potential threat is sewage pollution in the Seine, where swimming events are due to take place. In an analysis by the Surfrider Foundation, only 1 out of 14 water samples from the river were found to be safe for swimming. Bacteria, including pollution of fecal origin, remains dangerously high in the river, said the non-profit environmental organisation. And it's clear that athletes would be swimming in polluted water and taking significant risks to their health. Games boss Estanguet said last week that if water quality levels worsen, there could be a final decision where we could not swim. Mountains of scepticism. The Switzerland-based International Olympic Committee has mountains of scepticism to dispel in France and beyond, said the Associated Press. The $13 billion cost of the 2021 Tokyo Games and the unfulfilled promises of beneficial change for 2016 host Rio de Janeiro triggered widespread anger, and the 2014 Winter Games in Sochi were tarnished by Russian doping. But some previous predictions of Olympics doom have proved incorrect. In the run-up to the London 2012 Games, the army was drafted in to bolster the security presence provided by private firm G4S amid fears of a repeat of the riots that had broken out in the city in 2011. Journalists emit cyclical, loud buzzing noises before every set of summer games, said George Vexay in the New York Times in 2004. Reporters will continue to fret on schedule because it's in our job description. Estanguet acknowledged last week that before this kind of big event, there are always many questions, many concerns, but the Paris edition would make his nation proud, he said. Okay, so there you go. That's the article. Maybe what I should do is kind of go through each paragraph and just summarise each paragraph before I go into slightly more detail. So we've looked at the whole article. Let's close in on it a bit more and I'll just help you understand it bit by bit, and then we'll narrow down even further to look at specific individual phrases. So the lighting of the Olympic torch today comes amid a dampening of enthusiasm for the Paris Games. So the Olympic torch was lit today when this was published last week. But this happened in the middle of a situation in which people are getting less enthusiastic about the games. And this is in a wider social context in which there's some disagreement generally and discord, conflict, division in French society. So the Olympics is taking place in the context of a divided nation in which there are various different arguments taking place. So the Olympics organizer said, "We're ready for this final straight." He said this at a press conference to mark the 100-day countdown. Right, so when 100-day countdown started, there was a press conference, and Tony Estanguet, whose name hopefully I'm pronouncing correctly, made various statements. But the French capital's often hard-to-please residents appear in no mood for a party yet, said France 24. So, sort of maybe perpetuating the stereotype that Parisian people are unenthusiastic and moody. Is this a stereotype, or is it just true? This appears to suggest it's true. Parisian residents are not in a mood for a party, so people are not feeling very happy about it. And I've noticed the same thing, to be honest. I ask my students, I ask my audiences in stand-up. I do stand-up jokes about the Olympics. I talk about it quite a lot with French people, and the vast majority of people are a bit kind of about it. You know, no one's that enthusiastic about it. With the clock ticking down until the games kick off on the 26th of July, France's bitter politics and gloomy mindset are dampening the mood. So the mood, meaning the feeling, right? Whether people feel happy, enthusiastic, excited, or whether they're feeling sort of like unhappy, depressed, annoyed, you know. So the mood, the politics apparently is killing the mood, and also the mindset, the attitude of people in Paris or maybe France. All of these things are contributing to a sort of a bad feeling among a public which disagrees with itself. And the preparations for the games. So the build-up has been marred by rows that go to the heart of a bitter national debate about identity and race. This is what the Japan Times has said, apparently, that the preparations for the games have been sort of spoiled by arguments that go all the way to the heart of a sort of national disagreement about identity, that apparently France is suffering a sort of identity crisis. What does it really mean to be French? Who are the holders of French values? What direction is the country going in? And how do people feel about that? Now, at this point, the article mentions this, and that's a very strong thing to say, the heart of a bitter national debate about identity and race. The disagreements about the Olympics reveal something profound about France's identity crisis. But it says this, but then the article here doesn't actually give us any tangible examples of this happening. It doesn't really illustrate this bitter national debate about identity and race, which is a little bit annoying. Where are my notes? Here they are. I threw them over my shoulder earlier, but I've got other stuff written here. So although the article doesn't mention things about this bitter national debate about identity and race, I just noted some things down that it might be referring to. But it's interesting that's mentioned, but then not actually detailed. So I'm not entirely sure how the Olympics is central to this debate. Now, I understand the debate in France about identity and race. I'm kind of familiar with this and the main ideas behind it. And it's related to things like immigration, and national identity and race relations and so on, like the changing face of French identity in the aftermath of French colonialism, and then following that in sort of reparation for that, France's welcoming of immigrants into the country and how that's changed things, and how local people, sort of French people, feel about this, and also the difference between how Paris feels about things and how the rest of the country feels about things. There are various divisions, which is fairly common in any sort of Western democracy these days. This is a sort of a social pattern which has happened. And I'll have to say also that I feel like the narrative on this, on sort of national identity in response to things like immigration, the narrative of this is also kind of pushed by certain factions who want this to become more of a problem than it really is. And, you talk about sort of like influencers or political influencers or fake news outlets that really try and push this story hard because it's in the best interests of certain sort of groups or certain nationalities, nations or states or whatever, to emphasize the fact that, like, the UK, France, Europe, the United States are somehow crumbling under their inability to deal with race relations. So, the whole story has been weaponized to an extent. So it's interesting that this article mentions it, but then doesn't actually detail it. I wonder to what extent the Olympics is really a problem in this regard. But anyway, here are some ideas of how it could be an issue. So race and immigration. How will this actually come up in the Olympics? Several possible ways, and I'm sort of speculating here. And feel free to give your comments, especially French listeners, if you've got a better understanding of how the Olympics is at the heart of a debate about race relations. But one thing is that the authorities in France have been under a lot of pressure to ban certain religious symbols and clothing at the Olympics, because France is a secular nation, and this means that in certain public spaces or public institutions, it's actually against the law to wear religious symbols, or to display religious iconography, or to display things that represent your religious beliefs, because it's a secular country, right? There's a separation between church and state. So any of these big public things, for example, in public schools, there's no crosses on the wall. Teachers are not allowed to wear a cross, for example, around their neck. But also this relates to things like the hijab, right, which is the headscarf. And so there's been pressure for Paris to ban the hijab at the Olympics, and I think it's actually followed through with that pressure, and I think the hijab has been banned. Is that right? Let me check. I want to just check that I'm getting it right, that I know exactly what a hijab is. Yeah, the hijab is the headscarf, not the facial covering, just the scarf that covers the hair, basically. Okay. Yeah, according to the BBC, in September, the International Olympic Committee made clear that athletes in Paris can represent themselves and their faith as well as their country. So this is kind of where there's a divide. The normal way in France, which is controversial, is to say that these sorts of things are not allowed. And that's obviously, the intention there is to try to create a secular situation where there's no real representations of religious affiliation, which is supposed to be an egalitarian thing. It's supposed to be an equality thing, right? But what actually happens is that, to an extent, this is kind of like maybe state-level racism, which is somehow how it ends up happening, that certain people get targeted, certain things get targeted, and the hijab is like part of that. Is this France just being secular and non-religious, or is this the country targeting Muslims and their culture? So for the Olympic Village, the International Olympic Committee rules apply. An IOC spokesman told Reuters there are no restrictions on wearing the hijab or any other religious or cultural attire. So according to the Olympic Committee rules, the hijab is fine. The French team, though, that's the French Olympic athletes have been told something different. The ban on the hijab, a type of headscarf that covers the head and neck but leaves the face clear, is the consequence of two discriminations. It's Islamophobia, but also gender discrimination, says Veronica Noceda, who plays football for Les Dégommes, a Parisian football club set up to fight discrimination. But wait a minute, is the hijab banned at the Olympics? Okay, all right, so I've worked it out. So it seems that the French team have banned the hijab. Very controversial stuff, of course. It's all very controversial stuff, but I'm just giving examples of how debates about identity and race could be revealed by the games, and this seems to be a bit of a point of disagreement. So there's that, but then also there's the idea of sort of arguments about who is French, and when you look at athletes in the Olympic team, you kind of look at their ethnic origins and so on. And it's the same story with the football team, that certain people feel a bit unhappy because they feel like their team doesn't really represent France, or especially from outside of the country. Because for the football team, a lot of the players are of African descent, but they're French. I mean, they're French. That's why they're playing in the French team. But a lot of people from outside of France look at the French team and say, well, they don't look very French, do they? Well, they are French. That's just the nature of France as a country, and due to its history and how it responded to its colonialism. And as a result, it's sort of like France was involved in African nations, and as a result, a lot of African people came and settled in France, and they became nationalized as French people. And so, that's it. It's pretty simple, really. But anyway, there are certain debates about that. I don't really understand how that's an issue, because these people taking part in the Olympics are French. If they're in the French team, they are legally French. So, that's surely the end of that. Also, the Olympics represents something about a division in French life between the rich and the poor. And this is also arguably a sort of Paris, France division as well, because a lot of the wealth is centered in Paris. And so there's that sense of the Olympics is part of a rich, bourgeois, big business, Paris-centric thing. There's a lot of money involved in the Olympics. Where is that money going? Is it going to people in French society, or is it just going to go into the pockets of people who have control of all these things? Anne Hidalgo, the mayor of Paris, has been criticised for her spending choices. People have been arguing that she's using public money in the wrong way, spending public money on the wrong things, focusing on this arguably very sort of visual thing, something which is very much about the image of France and the image of Paris, putting on a great show for the world, spending all this money on it. Meanwhile, actual French people probably living outside of Paris are suffering, and they need investment and they need support. But instead, all this focus is on pouring money into the Olympics in a way that is perhaps not sustainable or beneficial for the future. Those are the usual debates around the Olympics, I think. Those are normally the issues that people have, about where's the money going and how's the money being spended. Spended? That's not English. What happened? How's the money being spent? And what will the long-term benefits be? So there you go. That's just an idea of some of those possible problems that are referred to here about a national debate about identity and race. There's also maybe another issue, which is that sort of idea of wokeism, which is a word that I don't love to use, to be honest. It sort of makes me cringe a little bit. The idea of wokeism, which is a sort of, essentially, it refers to a kind of progressive form of identity politics, which seeks to be inclusive and to include positive representations of groups that normally have been sidelined, ethnic minorities, women, different sexual, different genders, different sexual preferences, and so on. And the way that potentially the Olympics in Paris, and Paris as quite a kind of progressive culture, especially the administration which is running Paris at the moment is kind of progressive and therefore is seeking to promote those forms of cultural identity. That approach, it might be at odds with the viewpoints of people in other parts of the country who have a more conservative, more traditional view of French identity. And so that might also be another clash, that the way that the Olympics is being presented as this diverse sort of celebration of diversity might not fit with the views of other people in the country. So there you go. I mean, that may be some of the details about this bitter national debate about identity and race. Hervé Lebrun, the sociologist, said that the games threaten to underline the major fractures in France, the fracture between Paris and the rest of the country. I've just mentioned that. An Odexa poll of more than 1,200 Paris region residents last November found that 44% thought the games were a bad thing. That's a large number of people who think the games are a bad thing. That's a strong thing to say. And that 52% were planning to leave the city during the 16-day event. This makes me laugh because clearly Parisians have been asked, what do you think of the games? Do you think it's good or bad? And, a lot of them have said, oh, it's bad. Probably some of them were like, no, it's great. And a lot of them were like, I don't really care. And what are you going to do? 52% of them said, well, I'm going to leave the city. Well, of course you're going to leave the city. It's August. Everyone in Paris leaves the city in August, or at least half the population leaves Paris in August anyway. So that makes me laugh because that doesn't mean that they're leaving because of the Olympics. They're going to leave anyway. Like, most of these people aren't even going to be there. So I don't know what the problem is there. 52% were planning to leave the city. Yeah, of course, they're going on holiday. One Parisian told the BBC, this is so typically Parisian, this bit. And, sometimes I talk about the sort of Parisian attitude of, c'est pas possible. Non, sometimes I talk about that attitude. And sometimes I think to myself, am I being unfair? Maybe I'm being a bit unfair. I don't mean to be unfair about Paris or to represent sort of stereotypes. But then I read this and I'm like, actually, that's exactly how it is. One Parisian told the BBC that staying would be unbearable. So I'm going to break down the vocab afterwards. But staying would be unbearable, apparently. With the games making it impossible to park, impossible to move around, impossible to do anything. Which is basically like the Parisian person just going, c'est pas possible. Which is often the reaction to most things. I mean, to be fair, it could definitely be really difficult to do a lot of things. Whether it's going to be completely impossible, I don't know. It's already difficult to park in this city. Parking can be an absolute nightmare. Moving around, to be fair, can be an absolute nightmare. There are traffic jams. Impossible to do anything. Bah! Maybe. Security fears are also growing amid mounting global tensions. So it's not just these identity issues, but actual security issues relating to things like maybe potential attacks or other forms of, other forms of interference. In a break from the tradition of opening the games in the main stadium, the organisers have devised a grandiose ceremony centred around a parade of barges on the River Seine. So I mentioned this, and a lot of these things I'm saying I kind of mentioned briefly in the Walk and Talk Paris episode that I did recently, that the opening ceremony, the big plan, is to have all these barges on the river. Barges are like long boats used for carrying materials. So the plan is to actually have this grandiose ceremony, a sort of a ceremony that's going to have a big, ambitious plan, to be big and fancy, but it might not work. So the plan is to have a ceremony on the river, which, if it works, would be absolutely fantastic and beautiful. But this is also not sure, because there'd be a lot more risk of attack. It's a lot more vulnerable and open to problems, right? That situation. Whereas having it in the in the Stade de France, the big stadium, is a lot more. It's a lot safer. It's a lot easier to control, easier to manage the crowds and the people, right? I mean, it's way better from a health and safety point of view compared to just having it in the middle of the city, on the river. Also, there are questions about how do you prepare that area next to the river, the streets, the riverbanks? How do you prepare all that area? There are actually people who have their businesses there, cafes, little restaurants and bars, and also little bookshops. These, I don't know if you've been to Paris, but it's a famous part of life in the centre of the city on the riverbanks. You get these little independent bookshops, which are essentially like these green boxes that sit on top of the wall next to the river. And these boxes have been there for decades and decades, and they sell, literature and cards and tourist gifts and things like that. But the people who run these, that during the Olympics, they're going to have to move all their stuff. They're going to have to move these old green metal boxes. And some say that they can't move them, that they will break apart. They're unmovable now because they're quite old. And, so as usual with the Olympics, when you move the Olympics into an area, you have to move other people out. And that's always controversial. So anyway, this grandiose ceremony on the river with these boats going up and down the river, probably with like the different Olympic teams on different boats and stuff and whatever. It's quite a vulnerable in various ways, health and safety wise, but also vulnerable to different kinds of maybe terrorist attack or something. The original plan was for as many as 600,000 spectators to watch from the riverbanks, but security and logistical concerns have led the government to progressively scale back the plan. So not only are they considering moving it to the stadium, they've just reduced the number of spectators. President Emmanuel Macron said yesterday that the ceremony might be moved to a new location if the authorities decide the risk of an attack, potentially by drones, is too great. I mean, that would be absolutely horrific if you can imagine the opening ceremony on TV and everything, thousands of people out in the centre of Paris and drones come in. I mean, that would just be a total tragedy. So if the authorities decide that there's too much risk, if the risk of attack is too high, then they'll move it. And at the moment, the risk of attack is very high. What with what's going on in the world, the extremely high levels of tension that are happening in the world due to the Israel-Hamas war, and also the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And normally the world is in a pretty tense condition, but especially at the moment. With ISIS continuing to do what it does, so it's a very difficult time. So they are considering moving the ceremony to a different place. There are Plan Bs and Plan Cs, including holding the opening at the city's Stade de France. He told television interviewers. Asked if the Kremlin would seek to disrupt the Olympics, Macron said that he had no doubt. Okay, so, as ever, there's always stories of how the Kremlin tries to interfere with these sorts of things. I mean, I sort of touched on that idea earlier. How would the Kremlin do it? I don't know if they would directly, send in attacks or anything. That's not necessarily the way they operate in Europe. But what you do get is that they will attempt to destabilise and sow the seeds of disagreement and discontent, which we've seen, time and time again. I think, I don't think anyone can doubt whether this is actually happening. I think it's well known. And I'm talking about things like the spread of fake news and the general sort of manipulation of people's feelings and their attitudes, the stoking up of arguments and things like that. And this has been proven to be true. And of course it is. I mean, we're still in a form of Cold War. It's not even that much of a Cold War, is it? Which is obviously terrible. I know I've got lots of Russian listeners, and it's just sad, isn't it? It's just a tragedy when the governments of our countries are at war with each other, even if it's a proxy war. And it's horrible because it puts everyone in a difficult position. because you've got to decide where you stand and what you're going to do about it. And then on the other hand, there are the people who are actually in the direct firing line, including the people in Ukraine who are being, attacked, and civilians who are being killed. I mean, it's just a horrendous situation, and it makes me very sad. But would the Kremlin seek to disrupt the Olympics? Macron thinks that there's no doubt about it, that the Kremlin will somehow. How will it do it? I don't know, but maybe by, it's often it's about misinformation. And remember the story about the bed bugs in Paris? Do you remember that? I talked about it a while ago, a few times. There was this trending story a few months ago that there was an infestation of bed bugs in Paris, and that they were not only in people's beds, but they were on the metro, on the trains, and in cinemas. And so everyone was panicking and stuff like that. And there's a theory, and it's not even necessarily a theory. I think even like Emmanuel Macron said this, that story was planted by sort of a Russian fake news outlet, as a sort of insidious way to damage France's reputation, right? Bed bugs in Paris, Russian. Let's just put that in. This is from Le Monde, which is a major French newspaper. Bedbug panic was stoked by Russia, says France. France shut several schools in October last year over concern about bedbug infestations. France has blamed the Kremlin for spreading misinformation about the pests. It's hard to know, really, isn't it? It's hard to know what's going on. The comments by Europe Minister Jean-Noël Barrot followed growing warnings about from France about the dangers of Russian disinformation, particularly aimed at undermining support for Ukraine as it fights the invasion. The issue of bedbugs was artificially amplified on social networks by accounts that have been established to be of Russian inspiration or origin, he told TF1 television. It was very largely amplified by accounts linked to the Kremlin, he added. Oh dear, oh dear. Well, I mean, it's sad, this whole subject, and I'm sure that some people have very strong feelings about this. Let's move on. Another potential threat is sewage pollution. This is much more, what's the word for it? Much more fun? I don't know about that, but another potential threat is sewage pollution in the Seine. Sewage, and I'm going to be going through all this vocab. As I said, we start with the big context. We get a bit more specific as I give my comments to explain things, and then we get into the details like individual words. But sewage is basically the stuff that you flush down the toilet. You flush all your poo and urine down the toilet, and it goes into pipes underground. The stuff that flows through those pipes, we call it sewage. Okay? Those pipes underground, those are sewers. Where the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles live. They live in the sewers, right? So, sewage pollution, basically poo, okay, in the Seine, in the river. This is another potential threat, where the swimming events are due to take place in the river. Now, whose idea was this? Whose idea was it to do the swimming events in the river? I can't understand how that's going to be done when you consider... Which swimming events? I mean, I wonder if it will be like, the major swimming races. Surely they won't happen in the river because you got the current of the river, right? The river flows. So how are you going to do a race in the river when the water is flowing? Surely it won't be the major normal swimming events. Maybe they'll be doing other forms of swimming event, but there's that. But then also the quality of the water. I mean, don't swim in the River Seine. Just don't. It's dirty. I mean, it's definitely a lot cleaner than it used to be. There's no doubt about that, but I wouldn't want to swim in it. And it seems that sewage pollution, or, fecal matter, which is another word for poo, in the water. It's not like it's full of shit, that's not the case, but there's enough traces of it in the water for it to be a health hazard. You wouldn't want to, for example, swallow any of it. It can make you very sick. In an analysis by the Surfrider Foundation, only 1 out of 14 water samples from the river were found to be safe for swimming. So it's like only one case out of 14 was safe for swimming. How are they going to fix that? There's no way they can fix that in just a few weeks or months. Bacteria, including pollution of fecal origin, meaning pollution that comes from poo, feces, remains dangerously high in the river, said the non-profit environmental organisation, and it's clear that athletes would be swimming in polluted water and taking significant risks to their health. I wonder if the swimming's really going to happen in the river. Games boss Estongue said last week that if water quality levels worsen, there could be a final decision where we could not swim. So if the water conditions get worse, but surely even if they stay the same, Estongue, the boss of the games, is saying, well, we'll decide not to swim in the river. So who knows? I mean, maybe it's going to be a case of France or Paris saying, here's going to be our Olympics. It's going to be wonderful. We've come up with really cool things where we're going to have the opening event on the river. We're going to do swimming events on the river. And then they're like, actually, no, we'll do it in the stadium. And the swimming will be in a swimming pool. You know, the reality of it will be a lot more sober and modest than the kind of initial vision. The Switzerland-based International Olympic Committee has mountains of scepticism to dispel in France and beyond. So scepticism, which is basically like a sense that people don't really believe in the Olympics. People are unsure about it, doubtful. Right? It's like, people are not... The mood about the Olympics at the moment, not just in France, but in the whole world, is a little bit negative, and people have got their doubts and their concerns. So the Olympic Committee has to dispel a lot of these bad feelings. Here are some of the reasons why. The $13 billion cost of the 2021 Tokyo Games. I mean, that is an extraordinary amount of money. Extraordinary. It cost $13 billion. Why did it have to cost that much? I mean, maybe COVID was something to do with it. But still, I mean, in this day and age, when we have such terrible poverty in the world and such a terrible division between the rich and the poor, that this kind of amount of money can be splashed out on the Olympic Games. Naturally, people end up being a bit sceptical about this, and they start to think it sort of erodes people's what's the word for it? It just erodes people's belief in the games, doesn't it? And also the unfulfilled promises of beneficial change for 2016 host Rio de Janeiro. So the games were in Rio in 2016, and there were promises like, this is going to change the city, it's going to improve life in this city significantly, there's going to be all these benefits, beneficial change, but this was unfulfilled. So all these promises just came to nothing, apparently, and this triggered widespread anger. So basically people everywhere are just like angry with the Olympic Committee. It's a bit like the way we feel about it's like the way we feel about FIFA and the World Cup. And, you know, all you need to do is look at that Netflix documentary about FIFA, and you just like see the levels of corruption on display and the cynicism at the heart of that. You know, it's kind of sad. Again, sad aspect of our world these days is that we love football, we love sport, right? And that's wholesome, and that's pure, and that's good. And because we love that so much, all these forces have come in to squeeze as much money and, you know, take as much from this as possibly. This has been exploited. Our love for sport, for football, is completely exploited by these selfish, greedy bastards, basically. And so all this stuff basically changes the mood that we have about the Olympics. Widespread anger. And the 2014 Winter Games in Sochi were tarnished by Russian doping. So there's also doping as well, which refers to the use of illegal performance-enhancing drugs. So all these things make people cynical and sceptical about the Olympics. But some previous predictions of Olympics doom have proved incorrect. In the run-up to the London 2012 Games, the army was drafted in to bolster the security presence provided by private firm G4S amid fears of a repeat of the riots that had broken out in the city in 2011. So I mentioned before in the Walk and Talk episode the 2012 Olympics in London, which were in the end a huge success, certainly during the games, and in terms of the way that they made us feel about ourselves in the UK and London, and the way that the rest of the world saw the London 2012 games. I think overall it was positive, and it left a positive impression that people felt proud to be British when they saw that opening ceremony. The British Olympic team did well. I think we came third or fourth in that particular Olympics. And generally it was like good. And beforehand, though, a bit similar to the situation in Paris, in the months before the London Olympics, people in London were not happy about the Olympics either. And I was living there at the time, and I remember we were all quite cynical about it. We were all concerned that the city would be unbelievably crowded, that it would be impossible to travel. In the end, it wasn't that bad. I think part of the reason for that, though, is because the Olympic Village was out in the east of London in a kind of slightly more remote area in the east of London. London's a huge city, and the eastern parts, there's quite a lot of there are quite a lot of areas there which are like really far away from the centre of London, really, and that's where most of the activity happened. The Olympic Village was there, and the rest of it. In Paris, it's all going to happen in the centre of the city, right? These major places in the centre that all Parisians have to travel through on a daily basis. Boom, the Olympics is going to be dumped right on top of it. But anyway, in London, people were cynical about it and concerned about it, but in the end, it was a huge success. I don't know if, like, economically, financially, in terms of like living standards and poverty and stuff, if it really fulfilled its promises of beneficial change. But anyway, for the most part, the London Olympics was great. But yeah, as it says in the article, in the run-up to the London 2012 Games, the army was drafted in. So the army was brought in to bolster the security presence provided by private firm G4S. So it was felt that more security would be needed at the Olympics to deal with a possible riot. So a riot is when there's lots of people in the street all fighting, probably fighting with the police, damaging public property and fighting with the police, right? That's a riot. And in 2011, so that's the year before the 2012 Games, in the summer, there were riots in London and other cities in the UK. It was really extraordinary, actually. It was a response to the killing of a man in North London by police. There was a standoff with this guy who the police thought was a dangerous criminal. It's a bit like the George Floyd situation, if you know about that in the United States, when the police killed a man who was suspected of shoplifting, I think. Certainly not the sort of crime that would justify an immediate execution. I mean, in any case, that's completely illegal anyway. But anyway, this man, the police were in a standoff with him. They thought he had a gun. He didn't have a gun. He was killed. And the community went completely bonkers in response to this because they saw it as a completely unjustified assassination, essentially, of someone from their community. And there were protests in the street. Those protests became violent. They became riots. The riots actually spread around the city. So even in areas of West London where I was living, there were riots in, shops were getting burned. It was extraordinary. I talked about it on the podcast a couple of times. If you go back to episodes from 2011, maybe you might hear some accounts of that, including the one with Eamon, the episode I did with Eamon, which was called Setting the World to Rights, around about episode 100. And you can listen to Eamon's account of how he actually locked his doors and armed himself with a baseball bat in order to protect his kids from potential rioters who might break into his house. So it was a very scary time. So there were these riots the year before. And so everyone was concerned that there might be riots again in 2012. And so the army were brought in as a measure. But in fact, there were no riots. There were no problems really. I mean, in Paris, people are nervous about protests and riots as well. I mean, there are often riots here. But, we might see something like that. We might see like public protests. There might be strikes. There might be riots. Some of the events are going to happen in parts of northern Paris, which are normally sort of like problematic areas for crime, and certainly a lot of poor areas there with housing estates, which are considered to be sort of no-go areas for some people. And, that's going to be close to where the Olympic events are happening. So who knows? Who knows what's going to happen? I mean, there was like a Liverpool football game at Stade de France a couple of years ago, and loads of kind of, I don't know how to describe them really, just kind of criminals came in, and there was almost like an attack outside the stadium. The Liverpool football fans were blamed, but actually everyone was attacked by sort of gangs who came in to the crowd. So there's always that potential for these sorts of things to go on. But anyway, in London 2012, the army was brought in. Everyone was worried that there might be riots, but there weren't riots. It was fine. And journalists emit cyclical loud buzzing noises before every set of summer games. So basically journalists are always expressing these cynical, loud, dissenting voices before every games. And reporters will continue to fret on schedule. They will continue to worry and express their concerns every time because it's in our job description. That's their job, isn't it, to express those ideas. Estanguet, the organiser of the Games, acknowledged last week that before this kind of big event there are always many questions, many concerns, but the Paris edition would make his nation proud, he said. He might be right. He might well be right. We'll see, won't we, how the Olympics go. Obviously, fingers crossed, it'll be a great success. There won't be any problems. There won't be any fighting or anything like that. No security issues. And hopefully we will get something similar to the 2012 games, something that will genuinely make French people feel proud to be French and will make the rest of the world look at France or look at Paris and go, good one, guys, that was great. How's that going to happen? I don't know. But certainly what Paris wants to do is use its major assets and put them right on display. And that's why they want to do this thing on the river, because that's where you get all of those incredible tourist spots. The full beauty of the city can be shown if you do something on the river with the beautiful architecture down there. You've got the Eiffel Tower in the background. You've got the bridges. You've got the Notre Dame, which is still being reconstructed, and other incredible landmarks, the Grand Palais and other things, the Louvre and so on. So if they can display all those things, if we get good weather and if there are no issues, then it could be a huge win for France. But of course, some people don't want that to happen. And also, who knows? It might just rain the entire time. No one expects that from around the world. But Paris weather is a lot like London weather. So who knows? It might just piss it down for the entire time. It's not unknown for July to be quite rainy in Paris. So we will see what happens. Right. So, how are you doing, everyone? You doing okay? Shall we go through some vocab? Yeah, let's have a look at some vocabulary then. Okay, so what I've got here in my notes is a set of extracts from that article, and we're going to look at vocabulary from those extracts, okay? I'll try and do this quickly because we've been going for an hour, so I'll try and get this wrapped up without it being incredibly long. Let's try and make this less long than the Olympic Games itself. Let's see if that's possible. So, first of all, the build-up to this summer's Games is being marred by rows over national identity, security and pollution. I should say, by the way, it's the build-up to this summer's Games is being marred. Why is it is? Because you've got games here, which is plural, and some of you might think games are. No? Well, no, it's not. It's because it's the build-up, which is singular. The build-up is being marred. It's which build-up? The build-up to this summer's Games. That's why it is here. But anyway, the build-up, this refers to the period before something happens, a period in which preparations are being made, a period in which things are increasing. Okay? Right, so before any big moment, before any big event, there's always a build-up, and it's a build-up of excitement. So if something builds up, it means it gets larger. It increases. So you've got the build-up in terms of anticipation, expectation, but also build-up in terms of preparations. So the build-up means the period before something happens, the period in which things develop and increase. So the build-up to this summer's games is being marred. Okay, so marred is, let's say, a direct synonym of spoiled. So to mar something is to spoil something. Spoil is a much more common word, but marred is used here because it's definitely much more of a newspaper word. Spoiled is more just normal general English, but in the newspapers, they like to choose a slightly different tone sometimes, slightly different vocabulary, and it's a sort of a journalese or a kind of a journalistic style. Newspapers don't always use more formal language. Sometimes they use a lot of informal language like build up and rouse, but also they just tend to use certain words, which is another reason why you've got to be careful when you're learning English from the news, because they speak in news language. In general English, I would say spoiled. Okay, so for example, spoil something. If you spoil a cake, it means you let's say put too much salt in the cake, and then, you put too much salt in it, you spoiled it. Okay, in this case, the build-up to the games is being spoiled by arguments and disagreements. Rouse. A row, and that's pronounced row, R-O-W, right? To row and a row is an argument. A disagreement. Okay. Also, we've got the verb, which is what you do in a boat, and that's to row. Row your boat, a rowing boat, when you've got oars in the water, and including in the Olympics. Britain is quite good at rowing in the Olympics, and that's to row. That's R-O-W, right? That's same spelling as row, but the pronunciation is row. Yeah, sorry, English. What are you going to do? So the build-up to this summer's games is being marred or spoiled by rows or arguments over national identity, security and pollution. Second extract, the lighting of the Olympic torch. So the lighting of the torch, meaning when the torch is lit. So it's to light, lit. Okay? So the torch was lit a few days ago. The lighting of the torch, that's the sort of noun form, the gerund form. Okay? I also wanted to point out other words that are similar to that. So we've got, let's see, we've got to light something and to light something up. Whoops. We also have lightening, oops. Lightening and lightning. Okay, what's the difference between these things? So let's start with to light something is to make something on fire. You light a cigarette, you light a candle, you light the Olympic torch. Okay, so that's to make something burn. You light it with a match, with a lighter. To light something up means to illuminate it. Okay, so for example, the Notre Dame Cathedral is lit up at night. Is it still lit up at night at the moment? Certainly the Eiffel Tower is lit up at night. To be lit up, right? So that's light, lit. Okay, everybody? Light, lit. The Eiffel Tower is lit up, meaning it's illuminated. There are lights in the ground that shine up at the tower to make it look visible and wonderful. Okay, so it's to light something and light something up. Lighting is the lighting of the torch, right? Lightening means making something lighter, right? Lighten is the verb here, to lighten something. For example, to lighten your load. Okay, so if you're carrying a lot of stuff, I might say, hey, let me take some of those things. Let me lighten the load for you. And then lightning is what happens during a storm. Okay? Lightning is what happens during a storm. The electricity that comes down from the ground. Let's see if I can find an emoji for that. Yeah, there we go. So lightning is the actual electrical shock that comes from the sky. That's lightning. The sound that comes with lightning is thunder. So thunder is the sound and the electricity is the lightning. So anyway, this is the lighting. The lighting of the Olympic torch today comes amid a dampening of enthusiasm. So amid means in the middle of or while something is happening. And again, this is very common in newspapers because it's a neat, short word which is quite formal, which means while something is happening. Because, you know, in newspapers they often talk about something that happens while something else is happening, right? So this happens in the context of this. So amid is the word you use. So the lighting of the torch comes amid a dampening of enthusiasm. It's always amid a noun, right? So amid. So the appointment of a new mayor comes amid a bitter disagreement about identity politics, right? In the middle of or while blah 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 is happening. That's what amid means. Definitely something you'd see in newspapers. It comes amid a dampening of enthusiasm. To dampen something is to make it lower. Now, actually, damp, there's several meanings here. Damp, the adjective damp means a little bit wet. Like after you've had a shower, you dry yourself off with your towel, you put your towel back, and the towel is damp, right? But also to dampen, that's the verb with en on the end, doesn't just mean to make something a bit wet, but it means to kind of reduce something or soften something. For example, you would dampen the noise of something by covering it up, right? So if you've got a speaker which is making a lot of noise, you can put a cushion on it and it'll dampen the sound. To dampen the shock of something, you might put you might put like a rubber insole in your shoes to dampen the shock. If you do a lot of running on asphalt, on concrete or on roads, that's a lot of shock for your knees. So you might put a rubber insole in your shoes to dampen the shock of every step you take, every move you make, every breath you take. Sting, what are you doing here? So a dampening of enthusiasm, meaning enthusiasm has been reduced or sort of absorbed, right? In an increasingly fractious France. Fractious means that people are disagreeing. People are getting upset easily and disagreeing. A fracture is a crack. So, for example, if you break your arm, there's two ways you can break your arm. You can completely break the bone where clearly the two parts are separated, a clean break, and you can have a fracture, which is just a crack in the bone. So a crack in the bone is a fracture. If something is fractious, it just means that it's kind of breaking apart. And if a country is fractious, it means people are disagreeing with each other. There are lines of disagreement which are causing, arguments, right? So a situation can be fractious. A situation can be fractious. A country can be fractious. Moving on. We're ready for this final straight, said the Paris Olympics chief organiser, Tony Estanguet. Final straight. Now this refers to, I reckon it probably refers to a race and a racetrack. So you've got the straight parts of a racetrack and then you've got the curved parts on the ends. So if you're doing, the 800 metres, you go round the track a few times and the final straight is that final 100 metre sprint that you have to do at the end. That's the final straight. So it's the final section, the final straight section that you have before you reach your destination or before you reach the end of the race. The final straight. So it's the final section in the preparation for or the build-up to something. Okay? Right, in this case, it's like these last 100 days of preparation. This is the final straight before we get to the end. Number 4, to mark the 100-day countdown. So this was they organised a press conference to mark the 100-day countdown. If you mark something, you just sort of do something to, to mark the occasion. Like, for example, if it's your birthday, you might have a party to mark the occasion. If it's your anniversary, you'd go out for dinner to mark the occasion. So to mark the occasion, to mark the countdown, is just to have an event to recognise the importance or significance of something. In this case, a press conference to mark the fact that the 100-day countdown has started. I also wanted to point out, well, a countdown, I think you know what a countdown is, like 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, that's a countdown. In this case, it's a 100-day countdown. I wanted to just point out, as I always do when this comes up, because this is a common mistake that I see from learners of English, that one of my students might say a 100 days countdown, right? A 6 days event, a 5 minutes walk, but those are not correct. In fact, it's a 100-day countdown, a 6-day event, a 5-minute walk, because this is an adjective phrase. 100-day is an adjective phrase to tell us about the word countdown, which is a noun. Okay, and in English, adjectives don't get pluralized. So it's a 100-day countdown, a 6-day event, a 5-minute walk, a 6-year-old girl, a £5 note, a 4-star hotel. Okay, it's worth noting that. Number 5, with the clock ticking down, tick-tock, 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 tick-tock. Right? The clock is ticking down, meaning time is gradually getting shorter and shorter. With the clock ticking down until the games kick off on the 26th of July. So kick off is a nice phrasal verb. It sort of has a sporting sense to it. So at the beginning of a football match, you kick off. Beep, the referee blows his whistle and poof, you kick, the first team kicks the ball. It's called the kick-off, and the game kicks off at 3 o'clock. So to kick off means start, basically. The games kick off on the 26th of July. France's bitter politics and gloomy mindset are dampening the mood. There's that word dampening again. But bitter politics, if something is bitter, so it refers to a taste, but it also, in this sense, bitter feelings refers to disagreements where people hold on to a bad feeling. Resentment and negativity, holding on to a bad feeling, that's bitter. Bitter resentment, bitter hatred, bitter politics, where people just sort of feel bad. A lot of disagreement. France's bitter politics and gloomy mindset. I guess the bitter politics refers to, the political fractures in the country and the fairly passionate disagreements that people have about the national identity, as I mentioned before. And this is exemplified by the fact that, for example, Marine Le Pen, the right-wing politician, has got a lot of support, and there's actually a huge divide, just like there is in a lot of nations. You see this in the United States with the Trump supporters versus like everyone else, and in the UK, the kind of Brexiters versus like the normal people. It's very bitter. Yeah. Gloomy, the gloomy mindset. If something's gloomy, it means it's kind of, weather is often gloomy. If it's grey, the sun can't come through, it's kind of grey and a bit dark. It's so gloomy today. But your mindset, your mood, your feelings can be gloomy as well, meaning kind of sad, depressed. Bitter politics in France and the gloomy mindset are dampening the mood among a fractious public. There's that word again, said the Japan Times. It's not that bad. I don't think it's that bad. I don't think the mood is that gloomy, to be honest with you. I think this is a little bit unfair. It's not quite as dramatic as that. In my experience anyway, I don't know. I can't speak for everyone in this country. But, you get a sense that... So even though in the UK there was a similar feeling before the Olympics, but I don't think the commentators around the world were describing our mood as gloomy at that time. But the French often get criticised for being a bit moody and a bit gloomy, especially the Parisians. But this is maybe an example of like that confirmation bias that happens, where because people think that the Parisians are gloomy, that they interpret these events and they emphasise the gloominess It's not entirely fair. Number 7, the build-up has been marred by rows. So I've already done these words, marred by rows, like spoiled by disagreements that go to the heart of a bitter national debate. Okay. Hervé Lebras, whose name I probably mispronounced, a sociologist, told the paper that the games threaten to underline the major fractures in France. Threaten? If you threaten to do something, normally a person threatens another person. For example, they'll say, give me all your money or I'll break your legs. Right? A very basic threat. You do X or I will do Y. If you don't give me all your money, I will break your legs, sunshine. What? Some Cockney gangster. All right, look, listen to me, son, right? Listen to me, son. If you don't give me the money by 3 p.m, I will personally come down here and I will break both of your legs. Because I am a Cockney gangster in a... who's that director? What's his name? You know the one. Guy Ritchie. I'm a stereotypical cartoon and I've become Michael Caine suddenly. I've become a little bit more Michael Caine all of a sudden. Now, you're a big man, but you're out of shape. Now sit down or I will break both of your legs. I thought you were Michael Caine. I was for a moment, but the accent slipped. Anyway, to threaten someone, you give me the money, you give me the money, you son of a bitch. Now I've become Robert De Niro. Give me the... You're talking to me. Talking to me? You give me the money or I'll break your fucking legs. Well, what's going to happen to this video on YouTube? I might have to beep that swear word out because YouTube is a bit sensitive about swearing sometimes. Anyway, to threaten someone. Now, in this case, it's the games which are threatening to do something. They're threatening to emphasize the problems in French society. So the Olympics are like, you better organize these Olympic games. You better do a good job. You better do a good job because if you don't do a good job, I'm going to show the world. Threatening to underline the major fractures in France. To underline, like draw a line underneath to emphasize. Underline something. A bit like what you do when you're making notes, right? If you're reading a newspaper article, you might underline words. They're like, interesting words. I will underline the word underline. I will underline it twice. Underline the major fractures in France. These are these cracks that can cause breaks, Notably, the fracture between Paris and the rest of the country. If something's notable or notably, it's like worth noticing. Or something clear or obvious. Especially, right? It could mean especially. The games threaten to underline the major fractures in France, especially or notably the fracture between Paris and the rest of the country. An Odexa poll of more than 1,200 Paris region residents. A poll, P-O-L-L, this is a sort of survey to work out public opinion. Often before an election, you have polls. This is where people are asked, maybe before they're going into the election booth, or people are asked to say who they're going to vote for. And then before the election results come in, or before the election happens, you get a poll which sort of gives you a prediction of what the result might be. In this case, it's a survey of people's opinion, right? And Odoxa is the company that does this survey. So an Odoxa poll of more than 1,200 Paris region residents last November found that 44% thought the games were a bad thing and 52% were planning to leave the city. Well, they were going to do it anyway because it's August. During the 16-day event. Look, there's another one. 16-day event, not 16 days event. It's a 16-day event. One Parisian told the BBC that staying would be unbearable. Anyone who was part of my Zoom workshop recently will have noticed this. If you can't bear something, it means you just can't stand it. And for you, it's unbearable. Like, the example I would give is like very hot weather. I find it to be unbearable, even if it's above about 30, 35 degrees or more. It's just unbearable for me. It's too hot. I can't do anything. I can't stop sweating. I can't move anywhere. It's completely unbearable. For this Parisian, staying in Paris would be unbearable with the games because it would be impossible to do anything. Pas possible. Impossible to park your car, move around, do anything. Number 11, Security fears, so people's worries or how people are afraid related to security, these security fears are growing amid mounting global tensions. There's the word amid, meaning in the middle of or while something is happening, followed by a noun, mounting global tensions. Tensions in relationships between different countries are becoming tense, meaning they're becoming very nervous and strained and not relaxed at all. Mounting global tensions, right? As I mentioned before, the fact that different nations are not, the diplomacy is breaking down. Things are getting very tense between different nations of the world. As I mentioned before, this is mounting global tensions. Mounting is a bit like building up, basically getting bigger, like a mountain. They're mounting, getting larger, building up. Security fears, so people's fears about security are growing in the context of growing global tensions. In a break from the tradition of opening the games in the main stadium, the organisers have devised a grandiose ceremony. They've devised it, meaning they've thought of it, they've planned it, right? They've had the idea and created it and planned it. Okay? In this case, they've planned a big ceremony. A grandiose ceremony. If something's grandiose, it means normally of a plan. Plans are grandiose. A plan that is big and fancy and wonderful, but might not work. So like over-ambitious. A sort of over-ambitious, big, fancy project. That's grandiose. Something that's going to look fantastic and look wonderful, but actually might not be possible. So it's a sort of a slightly negative sense to it, in that it's you're saying that something is maybe a bit too overambitious and maybe a bit showy, like a bit flashy. A grandiose ceremony centred around a parade of barges on the River Seine, which means that the parade of boats on the river will be the centre of this this ceremony, and everything will be organised around this main central feature, which will be the parade of boats on the river. If that comes off, if they pull that off, it will be amazing. The original plan was as many as 600,000 spectators. These are people who are spectating, watching an event. 600,000 spectators to watch from the riverbanks. I think it's clear, isn't it, really? The sides of the river. But security and logistical concerns, that's like worries, doubts, fears, concerns, sort of concerned thoughts that people have led the government to progressively scale back the plan. To scale something back, nice phrasal verb, means to make it smaller. The scale refers to the size. And if you scale something down or scale something back, it means just make it smaller. Make the general scale, general size of the event smaller. President Emmanuel Macron said yesterday that the ceremony might be moved to a new location if the authorities decide that the risk of an attack, potentially by drones, is too great. Potentially means it's possible, it might be by drones. So if something's potential, it's just something that might happen. Okay? So the difference between saying an attack by drones means that it's definitely an attack by drones. Attack potentially by drones means that there will be an attack, but we don't know. It could be by drones, it could be by something else. Blah, 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 blah. Asked if the Kremlin would seek to disrupt the Olympics, Macron said he had no doubt. Notice the pronunciation of doubt here. The B is silent, right? No doubt. He said he had no doubt that the Kremlin would seek to disrupt the Olympics. Seek to would be like try to, look for a way to, right? Try and find a way to. Disrupt the Olympics just means make the Olympics disrupted, disturbed, cause problems with the organisation, cause problems with the running of the Olympics, right? Cause disruptions. Another potential threat, so there's that word potential, is a threat that might happen. A threat is a danger, something that could cause problems, right? We had threaten, which was like, give me the money or I'll break your legs. Come on, do the right thing. It's a threat. If you don't do that, I'll do that. That's to threaten someone. And you also make a threat, like, you better watch out, I'll break your legs if you don't pay me. Also a threat, another thing could be a threat that's something that causes potential problems. In this case, sewage, pollution in the river. Sewage, I mentioned before, this is the stuff that flows through the sewers. It's basically all the human waste. It's disgusting. Why did the turtles choose to live down there? I don't know. Maybe they mutated, didn't they, the Ninja Turtles? Did they mutate because of the sewage? Because all of those hamburgers and all the terrible American food that those New Yorkers were eating was eventually going down into the sewers, and the turtles just mutated and they became heroes. Sewage pollution in the Seine, where swimming events are due to take place, meaning that they are planned to take place. Right? 17. Bacteria, including pollution of fecal origin. What a lovely phrase, pollution of fecal origin. So this is kind of like more medical language, slightly more formal language, which is more appropriate for, let's say, the organizer of the Olympic Games, or a public institution, or an organization that researches the cleanliness of water and delivers reports for the government. They're not going to say poo. They're not going to say shit. They're going to say feces. And fecal is the adjective for feces. So pollution of fecal origin. Oh, you mean shit? Shit in the water? Or at least bacteria that comes from that. How lovely. Number 18, Games boss Estongue said last week that if water quality levels worsen, there could be a final decision where we could not swim. Worsen means to get worse. Right? Worsen. So, worse, bad, worse, the worst, but the verb is to worsen. Okay? Good, better, best. The verb there would be to improve. So improve, opposite, worsen. Okay, worsen, worsened, worsened. Number 19, the Switzerland-based International Olympic Committee has mountains of scepticism to dispel. Scepticism, as I mentioned before, is just that sense of doubt of, I don't believe it, I don't think it's true, I don't think it's going to happen, right? To dispel. If you dispel scepticism, if you dispel myths, if you dispel fake news, dispel misinformation, you prove it to be wrong and you make it go away. And it's dispel myths, dispel skepticism, dispel misinformation. So you prove it to be trong? Huh? Who? Prove it to be what? Prove it to be wrong and then make it go away. Right? So this is what the Olympic Committee has to do. They've got to try and fight back against all of these doubts and disprove them, and then make those doubts and skepticism, senses of, feelings of skepticism go away. Number 20. The 13 billion cost of the 2021 Tokyo Games and the unfulfilled promises of beneficial change. Unfulfilled promises. The promises were not fulfilled, means they didn't happen. So your dreams can be fulfilled or unfulfilled. Your expectations can be unfulfilled. Promises can be unfulfilled, means they weren't delivered, they didn't happen. Something that some vision you have of the future can be fulfilled or unfulfilled. Your ambition can be unfulfilled. Your potential can be unfulfilled as well. If someone's like, this kid's going to go far, you're going to watch this kid, he could play for England one day, and then, no, it didn't happen. His potential was unfulfilled. In this case, promises of change in Rio de Janeiro, those promises were unfulfilled. What kind of change? Beneficial change, right? Change for the better. No. What's happened to my mouth today? Come on. Beneficial change for the better. Benefits refer to good things that people get. I understand in some languages you use the word benefits to mean profits, like the money that you make at the end of a business transaction. But benefits in English just means any good things that you get from doing something. In the case of Rio de Janeiro, the Olympics, it would probably be an improved living standards, improved infrastructure, right? But apparently those promises were unfulfilled. Were they? Brazilian listeners, let me know. If you know about this, let me know. Those unfulfilled promises triggered widespread anger. So anger, we know what this is. Widespread anger just means anger everywhere, spread over a wide area. Right? So lots of people everywhere were angry about this. Not just people in Rio, but it was widespread anger. Anger everywhere. Okay? It triggered anger. To trigger is to make something happen. Like on a gun, you have a gun. There's the handle of the gun. There's the barrel of the gun. There's the trigger of the gun, which is the bit that you pull in order to make the gun fire. That triggers the mechanism. That's the trigger. So to trigger something is to basically make something happen. And you can trigger people's feelings, trigger anger, trigger like, I don't know what, trigger. It's normally anger, to be honest. Normally when someone feels triggered, they're like, "Argh!" Like on the internet, if you feel triggered, like, you know, what I said about Russia earlier on, probably triggered a lot of Russian listeners who are like, blowing the dust off their fingers to type me something, or maybe not. I don't know. That's not my intention anyway. I'm not out here. I'm not here to trigger anyone's feelings. Okay, I'm not. That's not my intention. I'm here to just talk sincerely and talk about the way things are from my position. Okay, I'm not here to trigger your feelings. So, you know, that's that. The 2014 Winter Games in Sochi were tarnished by Russian doping. Tarnished, it's similar to those other words that we had before, spoiled and marred. But tarnished really means when, for example, something that previously was shiny, like a metal shiny thing, if it gets damaged, then the shine comes off. You could say it's been tarnished. So it's basically when something looks less good. It looks less shiny, right? Metal gets tarnished, scratched and damaged, and this doesn't shine anymore. So that's tarnished. So in this case, the Winter Games in Sochi were tarnished, meaning the shine was taken off by Russian doping. Doping, yeah, meaning the use of performance-enhancing drugs. But some previous predictions of Olympics doom and gloom. Doom is basically like a really bad thing that's going to happen. Right? That's basically it, like the end of the world or something like that. Just a really bad thing that's going to happen. So predictions of Olympics doom would be where people say, it's going to be a disaster. There's going to be riots. People are, you know, it's going to, all the money is going to go in the wrong places. Life in the city will be disrupted. French people will be like, our lunch is going to be interrupted. No! I might not be able to get baguettes. These are predictions of Olympics doom, but previous predictions like this have been proved incorrect, like the one in London, where the army was drafted in. To draft in the army, meaning they were brought in to work. Oh, big wasp. There was a big wasp flying around outside my open window. But I think I managed to prevent him from coming in. That was a dramatic moment on the podcast. Why am I talking like this? Why have I suddenly started talking like Liam Neeson? I don't know. I don't know who you are. I don't know why you want to come into my bedroom. It's not my bedroom. Why did I say that? I don't know. Anyway, the army was drafted in. Basically, the army was ordered to come in to do something. The word drafted refers to when someone is ordered to join the army, or when the army is ordered to come in and do something. The army was drafted in, brought in, to bolster the security presence. Bolster means support, basically. Bolsters would be large wooden supports or props that would be put in place to make something stronger. For example, if there's a wall in your garden that looks like it might fall down, you would put wooden bolsters, wooden supports to bolster the wall, to stop it from falling down. In this case, the army was brought in to bolster the security presence, to support, make stronger. The security was provided by a private firm, G4S. A firm is basically another way to say a company. It's not exactly the same. There's like a legal difference between a firm and a company. A firm is technically a partnership, a different legal arrangement, but it's, essentially, for all intents and purposes, is the same thing. But a firm is a company. Normally we say like a legal firm, a law firm, a security firm as well. Amid fears of a repeat of the riots that had broken out in the city in 2011. I mentioned the riots before. Riots break out. If something breaks out, it suddenly starts and arrives. So a riot can break out. War can break out. And maybe the epidemic of a disease can break out. Meaning it starts and suddenly goes around everywhere. A bit like people can break out of a prison. Right? A prison breakout. That's where the prisoners escape from the prison and then they're everywhere. Right? The prisoners have broken out. A riot broke out in the prison. And then the prisoners broke out of the prison. Number 23, we're nearly at the end. Journalists emit, or they sort of produce this sound. To emit a sound. What sound is it that journalists emit or produce at this time? Well, they produce cyclical, loud, buzzing noises. All right. What kind of noises? Buzzing noises. Bzzz, like that. Loud buzzing noises. Zzz. Cyclical, loud buzzing noises. Zzz. Cyclical means going round in a cycle, going round and round and round. So repetitive, annoying, critical sounds. A bit like the sound of a fly buzzing around in your room. This is journalists around the Olympics. They start to go round and round in circles, making the same kinds of loud, negative sounds. They emit cyclical, loud buzzing noises before every set of summer games, said George Vexy in the New York Times. Reporters will continue to fret on schedule. I say schedule because I'm from the UK, that's British English, schedule in American English, but I say schedule. Reporters will continue to fret on schedule. Fret means worry, basically to worry about things. Oh no, it's going to be bad, it's going to be terrible, there are going to be riots, there are going to be drone attacks, all the swimmers are going to die from typhoid. Typhoid? No. All the swimmers are going to get cholera. No. The bubonic plague will come back. It's going to be the end of days. Oh no, worrying, fretting. I'm fretting about my exam next week. I'm fretting about the thing I've got to do. Stop fretting, just relax. Okay. Reporters will continue to fret on schedule, meaning they'll just worry based on a schedule, in this case, when the Olympic Games happen. Why? Because it's in our job description. Your job description is basically all of the duties that you have to perform as part of your job, right? Your job description is all the things you have to do. For example, as an English teacher, my job description is to plan lessons and teach lessons and do some admin, recording attendance and doing some assessments for students. This is my job description. Okay. So if something's in your job description, it means it's your job. It's one of your duties that you have to do as part of your job. So reporters will continue to worry about these things every time because that's their job. Estanguet acknowledged last week that before this kind of big event, there are always many questions. If you acknowledge something, this is a nice verb. It means you sort of, you admit or show that you think something exists or that something is true. So to acknowledge, in this case, he acknowledged that there are always many questions and concerns. He's like, yeah, fair enough. This is true. Before every big event like this, there are always concerns, worries, questions, and things like that. This is true. So he acknowledged that this was true. So acknowledge that something is true. It could be for many different things. Acknowledged that. Right, and let's get some examples. Let's find some examples here. And how am I going to do that? I'm going to go to ChatGPT. Right. Can you give me some examples with the word acknowledge? Question mark. Go. Sure, here are some examples of sentences using the word acknowledge. She refused to acknowledge his presence in the room. That means she ignored him. He was in the room, but she just didn't say hello to him, just ignored him. She didn't show that she knew he was in the room. She just ignored him. The company sent a letter to acknowledge receipt of the complaint. So I complained to the company, I don't know what the company was. Dear coffee company, the coffee that you sent me was in fact decaffeinated coffee when I wanted fully caffeinated coffee. And so please find this letter as complaint, and blah, 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 right? And the company wrote back saying, "Dear Mr. Thompson, I'm terribly sorry. We are here at the coffee company. We're terribly sorry to have sent you decaffeinated coffee when you wanted fully caffeinated coffee. And it must be terrible for you not to have caffeine when you need it. So please find enclosed in this package 3 packs of fully caffeinated coffee as our apology." So they acknowledged the receipt. Or it was like, "We received your complaint." They acknowledged receipt of the complaint. It's important to acknowledge your mistakes and learn from them, which would be like, yeah, okay, fair enough, I made a mistake there, that was my fault. So you acknowledged it. Compared to not acknowledging it, which would be like, "Someone made a mistake, who was it?" "Well, it wasn't me." "Me? Make a mistake? No, I don't think so. No, not me." No, he didn't acknowledge that he made a mistake. But in this case, yeah, okay, it was me. I made the mistake. Sorry. The professor acknowledged the student's insightful comment during the lecture. So the professor was giving his lecture, blah, 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 and the student said something, "Professor, blah, 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 maybe it's an important point here that I don't know." And the professor was like, "Certainly, very interesting point, well made." He acknowledged the insightful comment. Okay, so I think you get the idea. In this case, estongue acknowledged that before this kind of event, there are always big questions, many concerns or worries. But the Paris edition would make his nation proud. To make your nation proud, meaning make them feel proud. Hopefully this will be true and the Olympics will make French people proud because, France is all right. It's great. It's a lovely place. Beautiful country. It is. And sometimes French people can be a little bit sort of, I don't know, depends on the person, I think. It depends on the person that you talk to, but maybe a bit modest or a little bit gloomy, maybe. Not that I want to perpetuate any stereotypes, but I don't know. I don't feel like French people are always that happy to acknowledge how great France is. Although actually saying that, it's not true because there's loads of French people who are like, "Oh, France is number one." So I don't know what I'm talking about. But anyway, I hope you found that to be an interesting article, listeners. And at this point, I'd like to get your responses. Okay, obviously in a measured way. Okay, just write something nice, write something thoughtful, write something sincere in the comments section, either on YouTube or on my website. Okay, teacherluke.co.uk. What do you think about the Olympics this year? What about previous Olympic Games? Do you think that, how do you feel? Are you cynical about the Olympics? Are you looking forward to it? If you are cynical about it, why? If you are looking forward to it, why? Are you French? Where do you stand on all the things I said? And do you live in a place that's had the Olympics in the past? And how was it for you? Before, during, and after. Okay. All those notes and stuff, you can find them on the page for this episode on my website, teacherluke.co.uk, in the episode archive. Find this episode 880, you'll find those notes there. Okay. Premium subscribers, don't forget P59 parts 1, 2, P59 parts 1, 2. Okay. Just became Barack Obama for a moment. P59 parts 1, 2, and 3 are available to you now. Just make sure you've signed into your account, teacherluke.co.uk/account. Sign in. Make sure you've added the show to your podcast app of choice. I recommend Pocket Casts. It's definitely the best one because it's got a search bar. You can search Luke's English Podcast for P03 or whatever, and it'll bring it to you. Use Pocket Casts. It's available for iOS and Android devices. It's definitely the best one. You get the PDF links and video links in the show notes for each premium episode. That's it from me. Okay, I'll speak to you again very soon on this podcast, and have a lovely day, morning, afternoon, evening or night. Thank you for all the nice comments that I've been getting recently. I'm glad everyone enjoyed the last episode with Matt Abrahams. Brilliant, wasn't it? Full of insights, really interesting. And even though I was blushing during the conversation, it didn't matter at all. And it was quite nice to read comments from other people who also blush in similar situations. What can you do? There's not really much you can do about it. It's not worth worrying about, is it really? But yeah, it was just, I guess, proof, if you need it, that I'm not a replicant from Blade Runner, that I'm a human being and not some sort of cyborg or android. Okay, thanks for listening. Speak to you next time. But for now, goodbye. Bye. Bye. Bye.